What's going on, Wastelanders? This is Bento with another Steam controller playtest, and this time I'm actually going back to Fallout 4. In my first video regarding the Steam controller, I actually utilized Fallout 4 as the example for gameplay, but I thought I'd actually go back and show you guys my actual control scheme, so that way you guys can use it. So for the actual control scheme, it is sort of similar to how you'd see it on normal console controller configurations, again just with a lot of alterations here and there. Just one thing to note though, if you want to use this, I am using a pure keyboard and mouse setup. So in order to actually use this, you actually have to go into the settings menu and turn off the controller setting over here. And the only reason for this is because, as usual for some games, the controller and keyboard setups don't work too well if you want to do hybrid. So for my actual control scheme, my left trigger is just my normal aiming, and it is just a hair trigger. So if you soft pull or hard pull, it'll aim either way. My right trigger is to shoot. Also hair triggered, so if you soft pull or hard pull. My left trackpad, I actually have it to a touch menu. I have been having issues with fraps at the moment, so it might not even show up to begin with, but I will post an image of what it actually looks like. But it is a 9-button touch menu where I can select each of my weapons. My right trackpad is just my typical camera movement, using a trackball motion with a mouse style of input, and I do have motion control, which is tied to the right trackpad. My left bumper is VATS, although I can't really do it right now because I don't have I don't have anyone to do it on. My right bumper is to reload. My left not my left trackpad, but my left thumbstick is actually just my typical movement. And I actually altered this a bit to emulate a console control setup. So if I were to actually tap the control stick slightly forward or slightly tilted in any direction, I'll actually go into my walk movement. And if I were to tap it or tilt it all the way, it'll go into my run movement. And this is sort of, you kind of want to do this with control or console control settings that make you want to do stealth, or like when you're crouching and you need to move a lot slower. In order to actually do this, though, you have to actually turn on your run toggle. So I've actually set that to Y for me. So initially when you start the game, you won't be able to do it, and you'll actually go into a reverse direction where if you tilt it slightly, you'll actually do a run move, and if you tilt it all the way, you'll actually go into your slower movement. So you have to toggle between the run. You have to toggle run in order to actually be able to use this. And again, that's just set to Y. My X button is just to auto run if you want that function. The A button is to interact. The B button is to bring up your Pip-Boy. The left grip I actually have set to crouch. And my right grip I have set to jump. My start button on the right, or just the start button, is used to basically go into the normal options menu. And the left thumbstick, or sorry, not the left thumbstick, but the left select button is to go into your camera movement. And if you hold it and you use the right trackpad, you can circle around your character. And this is also important because if you're in towns or you're in your settlements, you want to hold select in order to actually access the workshop menu. Oh, and lest I forget, the right trackpad, if I were to click it, it'll actually be to melee, or in this case, throw a grenade, depending on how far you've hit it. So that's my control scheme, and let's show you guys some actual gameplay. So this mission takes place during the Silver Shroud mission. It's basically just a complex. You have to kill a whole bunch of people and then finally kill the last guy. I believe his name was Sun Jin. But basically I'm just going to be going around sneaking and killing a whole bunch of enemies. Overall, I really like this control scheme. It kind of helps me a lot, especially since my character is more of the sneaking type, and I generally just shoot people from afar and even try to melee them if I can, like I'm about to do here. But much like how I first tried the Steam controller with Fallout 4, I think the control scheme works pretty well. Shooting feels fluid, especially with the motion controls for aiming. I am again using my typical, I guess, Halo style setup where my right bumper is to reload. And again, that's just to make sure my thumb always stays on the camera movement. And as you saw there, aiming with the motion controls is just as precise as you can be with it. I especially like VATS with the Steam controller because instead of having to select limbs with the right thumbstick as you normally do on a typical console controller setup, since I am using a mouse for the right trackpad, I can easily select limbs without having to like fiddle around. And what I mean by that is, if you guys have ever played Fallout 4 or even Fallout 3 on the console, it can be a little janky, I guess is the best way to describe it, to select limbs during VATS. And that's because the right thumbstick just toggles between the limbs. With the mouse cursor, it's just a lot easier to select the limbs since all you have to do is just hover over the one you want to shoot. I actually also had to do some secondary mode shifting for the motion controls as well as the right trackpad. And the reason for that is because when you aim down the sights, it actually decreases the sensitivity quite a bit. And so it kind of feels weird to aim. So what I had to do was actually modify the aim control by mode shifting it. And so whenever I hit the aim button or the left trigger, it mode shifts the motion control as well as the right trackpad to emulate a mouse style of input but with a much greater sensitivity. You guys might have to adjust the sensitivity just so it's to your liking, and you can easily do that through the Steam controller or through the game itself.
Turn up, you're dead.
Hey, something's out there. I see you.
I've done this hundreds of times. Think you'll be any different?
Guess we showed them.
One issue though with the control scheme is that accessing the quick inventory whenever you're hovering over a cabinet or like dead bodies is a little hard to access since I don't have a scroll wheel, or at least a proper one, and so it's a little difficult to cycle between items you might or might not want. With my modified scroll wheel, it's only really helpful whenever you're in the Pip-Boy menu, and so it's a little hard to use whenever you want to quickly get a couple items. For me personally, it's not really that big of a deal because I can always just access the normal menu, and in general I mostly just use the quick inventory when I need to get to ammo and stuff. But if it might be some kind of a problem for you guys, you can always just mode shift a certain key, like the triggers, to modify the left or right trackpad to be a scroll wheel instead. For me, I kind of don't like having my mode shifting keys on the triggers, since mostly they're primarily used for aiming and shooting. Oh, in case any of you guys are wondering why I'm running full tilt rather than having to move slowly with the left thumbstick, the only reason is because I have the stealth perk maxed out completely, and so I can just crouch and run at full speed without having them to worry about detecting me. But the slower movement speed will help you early on, especially if you want to do an early sneaking build.
Shit's got ambush all over it.
I've also had one really weird issue with Fallout 4 and using the touch menu, and some of you guys have also mentioned this. There's an issue where if you use the touch menu, your frames will completely drop. I remember when I checked, it dropped down to like 10 frames per second, and the touch menu just disappears completely. The only real way to really resolve the issue is to just restart the game. It's happened to me once or twice. It's a little inconsistent. It's kind of just happened out of random times. But if that ever happens, you pretty much just have to restart the game. And thankfully it's not an internal Fallout 4 issue, so you can always just quick save and load the game back up.
What were you hiding?
One thing you could do is, if you want to use more mode shifting options, you could dual trigger function the right trigger to have both aiming and shooting capabilities. That way your left trigger can be used to mode shift any of the other buttons. And even then, you could also dual trigger it to maybe throw grenades and do other things you might want to do. I've also thought about it for a melee controller configuration on the right trigger, where the soft pull would be the normal attack, and then the hard pull would actually be the heavier attack.
Don't you die on me!
One other issue that I kind of had with the Steam controller and using the left thumbstick is that since it's using a directional pad button to emulate the WASD keys, it's not as precise as moving on the console controller setups. And so it feels weird because you're only moving in technically 8 different directions, whereas on a thumbstick on the console, it moves intuitively with wherever the thumbstick is going. And so you have a wider array of different movement
Say
options.
it again.
Super
Hold
mutants
assholes.
decorate this place?
Anyone turns heel.
So we're actually just about to finish up, guys. I'm just going through this one final conversation before this mission ends. Other than a few hiccups here and there, I think this control scheme works really well, and I think you guys might like it too. If you're not comfortable with having the different movement options on the left thumbstick, you can always just turn that off and use a run toggle instead to modify however you want to
Some of these
move.
losers think you're some sort of legend. Like you walk straight out of a comic book. But you and I know you're human. And you're weak. You came here and for what? You little sidekick?
I have cut a path through all your thugs. Who can truly say I'm not the Shroud?
Don't listen, man. He's a phony. So what's gonna happen is this. I'm going to kill Kent. Then we're gonna shoot the hell out of you. Nothing's gonna be left but paste. Then, I'm going to Good Neighbor and kill every last worthless bastard there and burn the whole thing down. No one screws with Sinjin.
I am the instrument of justice, and I cannot fall. Death has come for you, evildoer, and I am its Shroud.
Stop talking like that!
It is the Shroud. It really is. Screw this.
Cowards! Cowards!
Sorry, Kent. But that's all for me, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.